in America, the oldest university I know in Scotland is a second oldest university, and Adam Smith University. Will be an honor that you can have the chair, the Adam Smith, no?
Yes.
In our university, yes, there are some chairs in this area, the historical. Well, the idea of the seminar, Sayantan, is the share the North experience and South experience. In our seminar, we have a speaker, professor from Stellenbosch, South Africa, Cape Town, South Africa. In South Africa, we can find not only African, also the Indian scholars, Indian professor, because there are Indian migration to South Africa in 19th century. Very important this experience in the South. Yes, we have activities with the Indian University, Delhi, Goa. There are a university, Muslim university in 19th century in India, very important. Of course, the Southeast Asia, we have activity with the Gadamada Indonesia, Malaya, and of course, Singapore, Nayan, Singapore, no? And in South America with the Sao Paulo University. Well, the idea of the seminar is shared experience in research, the North, global North and global South. This moment, 21st century, we can see a transition. The 20th century, 21st century. In 21st century, we can find will be a different relationship within the South and the North. In this transition, it's very important to know, no? The research professor from the North in this experience with the new South and his or her research. With United Kingdom, St. Mark University has no agreement, but we have some activities. In the seminar has participated the University College of London, University of Liverpool, in the last year in January and February. So Scotland has a long history with Latin American. For us, in Latin America, in South America, we know the connection in the independent age, early 19th century, within Edinburgh, Glasgow, and the political thinker, the South American. Spain has a treaty with United Kingdom because France, Bonaparte, Napoleon Bonaparte conquest Spain, and in this moment is a new relationship between United Kingdom and Spain. United Kingdom start a big activity in South America, in Latin America, Liverpool, in general, no? The United Kingdom city has a Latin American experience. Also, I read your university has this year is the 250 years old, the American Declaration. There are students, no? The Glasgow University student live in America and sign the signature of the American Declaration. Yes. Your university has American experience, no? Sometimes.
Indeed, it does.
Well, Sayantan, we had some students in the seminar, the Sao Paulo University. I would like to introduce you, Yandra, Luisa, Ilen. Please, Yandra, Ilen, Luisa, can you present?
Hi, we have to introduce ourselves.
Yes,
Yes, okay. In English or Spanish?
please, English.
Okay.
If you can, my Spanish is very bad, I'm afraid.
But
Okay.
Portuguese, Luisa is de Sao Paulo.
Okay.
Ah, see. Uh, oh, hi, good morning. My name is Luisa. I have 23 years. At the moment, I study environmental management in University of São Paulo. At the moment, I'm having uh, in, ¿cómo llama? Un
Internship.
intercambio, internship in São Marcos.
Okay. Hello. Very nice to meet you, Luisa.
Nice to meet you
Oh,
all.
yeah. Thank you, Luisa, Ilen, Yandra.
Mm. Oh, hello. My English not so good too, but hi, nice to meet you. My name is Ziling. I'm from Ribeirão Preto, and I'm studying management. And I'm still here in Peru with Luisa and another girls. And I am 22 years old. I think it's that. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Very, very nice to meet you. And your English is much better than my Spanish can ever be. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Yes, Yandra, María.
Hola, buenos días. Bien, yo no hablo inglés ni comprendo inglés, entonces voy a presentarme en español. Soy Geandra, tengo 22 años, estudio letras, portugués y español, entonces por eso hablo español y no inglés. Bien, estoy estudiando las políticas de permanencia en la Universidad de San Marcos y bueno, es eso, un gusto.
Gracias.
Gracias. Yeah.
Well, Sayantam, we have experience with Sao Paulo University. The seminar hosts a student from Sao Paulo University. The idea is to develop global study, transnational study. I think in the future we can think, why not, the Glasgow student in Lima to have a sub-Pacific experience in transnational study. There are,
I would very much support that initiative. And I'll
yes,
be very happy to connect you to people in the business school, but also in the university, who can take forward that initiative in Glasgow.
the student, the young need a transnational experience because the young will be the leaders in 21st century.
Mhm.
Well, Ámbar, ¿estás? Ámbar, ¿puedes presentarte, por favor?
Okay. Good morning, Professor Sayatang and also Professor Hector. Well, my name is Amber Zamora and I'm 20 years old. And now I'm currently studying international business at the University of San Marcos. And it's a pleasure to me to stay here and thank you for all the knowledge that you are going to share to us. Thank you very much.
Very kind of you. Thank you very much, Amber, for those kind words, and greetings to you.
Ámbar is a leader in the international business, will be a future project in San Marcos University. Well, Sayantan, I can share your presentation. We can, please, I give introduction. Amigos, amigas, estamos en el Seminario Universidad y Desarrollo, una propuesta académica del Vicerrectorado Académico de la Universidad Nacional Mayor de San Marcos. Hoy día tenemos el honor, el placer que nos acompañe el profesor Sayantan Gozal de la Universidad de Glasgow, que dirige la cátedra Adam Smith en Economía Política. La Universidad de Glasgow fue fundada en 1451, es la segunda más antigua de Escocia, la cuarta en el Reino Unido, seguida, ¿no?, antecedida por San Andrews. Tenemos que esta universidad, la Universidad de Glasgow, tiene una experiencia americana muy antigua. James Wilson, estudiante de esta universidad, luego vivió en Estados Unidos, Norteamérica, y firmó la Declaración de Independencia de Estados Unidos. Glasgow tiene una experiencia americana del siglo XVIII. Tiene múltiples profesores muy destacados. Diríamos que entre ellos podemos subrayar Adam Smith. Justamente el profesor Osal dirige la cátedra Adam Smith de Economía Política, pero también el profesor, el maestro de Adam Smith, que es Francis Hutchinson, muy importante en la orientación de Adam Smith, y también del área de ciencias como Lord Kelvin, de medicina, tan importante para San Marcos. Lister fue profesor, fue catedrático en la Universidad de Glasgow, además de muchos distinguidos, ¿no?, profesores, académicos, políticos del Reino Unido. Bien, thank you very much, Diane Tan, for your time, for your help. I can share your presentation, please.
I can try and share it from here too. Maybe it is easier, but I need to. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. I hope all of you can hear me. So, thank you very much for this invitation, Hector, to give this talk. I am very, very humbled by your invitation. San Marco University in Peru is an old university, one of the oldest, and I know that it is deeply connected with the political, economic, and social life and the literary life of Peru. I have never been to Peru, but I'm a curious. I've been curious about Latin America in general, but Peru in particular, for many years. I know very much that he probably has a mixed political position, but Mario Vargas Llosa, growing up in India as an undergraduate student, but also later on in life, remains one of my favorite authors. I've learned so much from him about many things. I know that he may have a mixed political reputation there, but that's beside the point. So thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you for organizing this talk. So just very briefly, I'm currently the Adam Smith Chair in Political Economy at the University of Glasgow. This chair is the oldest chair of political economy, one of the oldest chairs of political economy in the world. It was instituted in the 1890s in the University of Glasgow. This year is the 250th anniversary, not only of the American Declaration of Independence, in which many Scottish had an important role to play, but also the 250th anniversary of the publication of the Wealth of Nations. And the Wealth of Nations is of course one of the foundational works in economics, which is more subtle, I think, in its message than many people give it credit for. So let me just begin by trying to link what I'm going to talk today to the themes and the issues that Adam Smith in his Wealth of Nations talked about. Adam Smith in his Wealth of Nations talks about the first and the main contribution of Adam Smith in the Wealth of Nations is really to shift away from a mercantilist view of wealth of a nation, from the wealth of citizens, of kings and rich merchants, to basically saying that the wealth of nations is about the welfare of ordinary people, ordinary citizens who live there. And Smith was writing this book um, at the time when there was an emerging commercial society in Scotland. So Smith is talking about how such an emerging society in Scotland, this commercial society, how it can contribute to the welfare and well-being of ordinary people in the UK, but also elsewhere globally. Smith was a great opponent of privilege, inherited privilege. He was a great opponent of colonialism, and he actively argued against all these phenomena and forces, to discuss the benefits of genuinely free trade and genuine voluntary exchange and the accompanying division of labor and so on as sources of prosperity and wealth. Now, what I want to talk about today is I want to talk about some of the issues that are implicit in Smith's description of this commercial society that he's talking about in The Wealth of Nations. So, in his Wealth of Nations, Smith doesn't really talk about power or political power. It's taken implicit in the background that the kings or the rich merchants or the oligarchs of a society, they don't have political power, or their political power is substantially mitigated by some political mechanism. And what I want to do today here is I want to talk a little bit about the way in which democracy is one such mechanism. Democracy is the only known mechanism that we have, which basically prevents the concentration of power, which has tried to prevent the concentration of power amongst a narrow section of elites, which has tried to redistribute, which has enabled some redistribution and some participation in the wealth that of a nation by people who are not part of an oligarchy. So it is very important to understand how democracy emerges. Now, and how it is sustained and what determines its stability. It is particularly important in our time, in the year 2026, when there is a very famous Swedish research group that looks at the health or the state of democracies globally in different countries. And their latest data is very pessimistic, in that it has shown that many countries that could be considered to be democracies have now developed or started developing features of authoritarianism, including the country of which I'm a citizen, namely India. So the question that I want to address today is, what are the conditions under which democracies emerge? What are the conditions under which democracies are stable? And on the contrary, what are the conditions under which democracy may cease to be stable and in its place oligarchies emerge? So those are the questions that I want to talk about. And my starting point is not so much a normative position about why democracy is desirable, because it has many great features, so I'm not going to repeat those. It is really to understand that in many different parts of the world, in many different societies, at different points in time, in different parts of the world, a democracy is best seen as coming out of intra-elite conflict. Okay, so intra-elite conflict is a pervasive feature of many societies. For example, in the 19th century, in Latin America, in Europe, it was the conflict between the landed upper classes and the urban bourgeoisie. In post-independence India, it is also the situation that it is that there was a deep-rooted conflict between the landed upper classes and the bourgeoisie and the urban bourgeoisie. The urban bourgeoisie pre-independence India were supporters of India's independence struggle against the British. To a very large extent, the landed upper classes were very happy with the colonial rule. So there are points of conflict, and I'm going to here talk a little bit begin by talking about the pervasive aspect of this inter-elite conflict at different points in time across different types of societies. So one of the first books, the first scholars who talks about the issue of intra-elite conflict as explaining the dynamics of change in a society is the medieval Islamic scholar Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun, in his book, which he wanted to write, which was a history of the world, really, the first volume of that is an introduction to the history of the world. It's called Muqaddimah. And in that, he proposes a theory of political change in Islamic societies and driven by intra-elite conflict. So basically, in his view, you have an urban elite, which is linked in his time and in the societies that he was talking about to trade, especially long-distance trade. And this is a great source of prosperity for this urban elite. And they tend to be the dominant elite in those societies that he's talking about, societies in North Africa mainly, what is now Middle East and North Africa. And then you have the elites in nomadic tribes who look upon the city dwellers and the city and the rich in the city, the urban elite, with covetous eyes, coveting the wealth that they possess. And then basically, in the name of inevitably, the urban elite grows soft on religious orthodoxy, on religious doctrine, and in the name of true Islam, you have then the elites of nomadic tribes who rally the poor in the nomadic tribes, and to some extent the urban poor as well, in the name of Islam. And then they revolt and overpower and conquer and displace the urban elite, till over time they become part of the urban elite themselves, and in turn over time are displaced by the now new elites in nomadic tribes. So this leads to a cyclical theory of change. It's a theory of instability. Note that there is no democracy here. You have one oligarchy being replaced by the other through a means of revolt and mobilization of the non-elite. More recently, Peter Turchin, along with who's an American academic, along with other scholars from Russia and Slovenia, have developed a theory which basically, and they explicitly acknowledge so, is basically based on a reinterpretation of Ibn Khaldun's theory of cyclical change in Islamic societies, but they apply to all history and all societies. And theirs is a theory of political disintegration. Again, you have a conflict between elites who occupy dominant positions. The theory is not so much that the elites and counter-elites control different resources or have access to different factors of production or control different factors of production. It's really that you can only have so many elites in any given society. And then basically you have a number of other people who are, broadly speaking, of the upper classes who want to be elites. So these are the counter-elites. But because of the shortage of a number of elite positions, can't be elites except by displacing the current elites. And they do that essentially by mobilizing non-elites. And this mobilization is successful when you have rising inequality. So when the non-elite are relatively impoverished. So the oversupply of elites combined with the relative impoverishment of the non-elite drive political disintegration and cyclical change. So this is the theory that Peter Turchin is trying to push at different points in time. Now, in a more contemporary vein, in many Piketty and his co-authors and other scholars as well have noted that where earlier the working classes would vote for parties like Labour, now increasingly Labour has become, for instance, in the UK, a party of the urban educated middle class. And instead you have white workers voting for other groups like Reform and other types of authoritarian groups. So this division again between a professional middle class and the owners of capital, namely big owners of big industry, that's a source of intra-elite conflict. But again, the mobilization of non-elite remains central to those concerns. So the question that I want to ask in this talk, I want to address in this talk is, can democracy emerge as a solution to intra-elite conflict? And it's not obvious. Both Peter Turchin and Ibn Khaldun clearly make the point that political disintegration and cyclical change are endemic features of societies driven by intra-elite conflict. And in contemporary periods, intra-elite conflict, the resolution of it may not happen through democracy. It may indeed happen, it may indeed take a different form, as indeed it already has in the US and in other parts of the world. So this is not a new question. The scholars who looked at the countries that were newly decolonized in the 1940s and 50s, but also countries that gained independence from Spain in the 19th century, namely countries in Latin America, they also looked at the issue of the emergence, the conditions under which stable democracies emerge. And basically, all of them, without exception, came to this following conclusion, that a fundamental precondition for stable democracy is a balance of power between the landed upper class and the urban bourgeoisie. While totalitarian regimes arise whenever one class dominates the other. So this is particularly important for Latin America. It's particularly important for Asia, for countries that were decolonized in Asia, important for countries like Japan, but also Germany pre-Second World War. It's important for India's subsequent post-colonial history, that this balance of power. And the question then becomes, what is the thing that guarantees this balance of power? Olson makes the same point in a slightly different language. We can deduce that autocracy is prevented and democracy permitted by accidents of history that leave a balance of power or stalemate, a dispersion of force or resources that makes it impossible for any leader or group to overpower all the others. And Paul Collier, another British economist, talks about the central role of political or economic elites bargaining and in all processes of transition to democracy. Pranab Bardhan, who is still alive and is now at University of California in Berkeley, but who also has spoken and conditioned and talked about democracy and the conditions under which democracy is stable in a country like India, essentially makes the point that in a democracy, one elite can use the threat of coalition formation with non-elites to strengthen their bargaining power with the other elite. So essentially, democracy arises when sections of the weaker elite are able to mobilize the non-elite in order to get to a better bargaining solution with the stronger elite. And it is this thesis that I'm going to examine in detail today. So can we get, yes. So the next slide. So the next slide is really, I'm going to set out a theoretical framework for this. I am by training a game theorist, and an economic
Gosal,
theorist. Yes,
Professor Gosal, in
please.
this moment could be important. Democracy is a Athenian proposal to 1,500 years ago, no? The Athenian democracy. We can see in this time an economy, the slavery economy, support this political propose. The Athenian experience last some century, no, some century. After we can see the Roman proposal. The Roman proposal is a oligarchy, some aspect the democracy, but oligarchy political rule. This Roman proposal lays last some century, but the people think about democracy. In Middle Age, we can find several texts about this Greek experience and the modern history, modern times, no, 500 before we return to think about the democracy. 18th century, we celebrate this year the 250 years the American Declaration. This experience, the historical experience, very important for our civilization. India has a long history, and the India experience in democracy is 20th century. No, 20th century start the Indian experience in democracy in South America. In Latin America, we can think in the before the independence, when the France conquest Spain, Spain developed an Congress, Cortes de Cádiz. Cortes de Cádiz was an election, the Spain America, for deputies to join in Cádiz, and first General Assembly in Spain and Iberoamerica 200 years ago. So this is experience, at the same time, very old experience, very young experience, no? We can find the democracy experience not only in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, in America. The challenge, no? The challenge is how this political proposal join with the economical process, no? The technological process in this moment, no? I see our generation is a challenge to connect, no? This experience.
Indeed. So thank you for that comment. I think that's very useful. So I think it's very useful because I realize that I haven't really talked about what I mean when I talk about democracy here. So the first thing is that a democracy, if if you look at when is it that you have democracy? Then first is you must have franchise. So the people who can elect or who can vote in a democracy, they must constitute all adults in a society, regardless of the gender, regardless of their wealth, regardless of their ethnicity or race. People who are entitled to vote should be defined by some constitutional rule, which basically says that all adults in a democracy can vote. So the franchise in a democracy is fundamental. But the second thing, and that we'll discuss that, is that it is equally important to talk about the freedom of association. So by that I mean the ability of people to form associations like political parties, like civil society organizations, like community-based organizations, which are essentially without interference by the state. So this is an equally important aspect. So the cost of collectively mobilizing for a cause, for a political cause, but also for any other cause, a social cause, or whatever. So it is these two things taken together that, in my view, makes democracy a solution to intra-elite conflict. Now, if you look at Athens, as you talked about it, in Athens, you can formally, of course, certain people were allowed to vote, but these happened to be people above a certain age. They were men, and slaves and women were explicitly excluded from that process. So I would, in today's language, and I'm not imposing the values of today on Athens, far be it, but basically these were, from the perspective of my talk, I would say these were partially democratic, or anocracies is another word that many political scientists use today. If you look at the history of UK with respect to democracy, then of course, since the Magna Carta times in the UK, some version of democracy has always come up. You had parliaments that were responsible for passing the budgets and laws of kings in the UK for centuries. But the people who elected those members of the parliament who could do these things, they were very restricted. So the franchise was very restricted, and it took a lot of struggle. And at the same time, the ability of people to associate freely, to create political parties or what have you, these things only happened very recently in the UK as well. It was only in the 19th century that unions, etc., were forming, and the cost of participating, of organizing collectively, became very low by design, by political design. And franchise was gradually extended. And it wasn't until the 20th century that franchise was extended to women in the UK and in many parts of the world. In fact, in Switzerland, I believe it was only extended in the 1970s to women. So they had a limited franchise even earlier than that, till that time. Now, democracies. So that's one thing. Now, again, I should emphasize that without this freedom of association, without the freedom to act collectively, elections by themselves do not indicate anything in terms of whether that society is democratic or not. In fact, Hitler in the 1930s held referendums all the time. And even today, there are many countries where dictators hold referendums, they hold regular elections, but they do so without freedom of association, freedom of collective activity. And in those cases, we can't really talk about a democracy. We are still talking about an oligarchy. So democracy really is a world in which you have this both a very broad franchise, basically consisting of all adults all people above a certain age, coupled with the ability of such adults to mobilize collectively for whatever cause they. Sorry, can you just go back to the previous slide? I still haven't finished the previous slide. Yeah, thank you very much. To act. I'm just still responding to your question, but thank you for that comment. So now I want to set out a theoretical framework. I did so, which builds on an earlier paper that I wrote on Indian democracy with a co-author of mine, Eugenio Proto. But now I want to, which was published in the Journal of Public Economics in 2009. But today's talk, I want to begin from that same framework, but take it in a different direction. So I'm thinking of the simplest possible framework where we can talk about intra-elite conflict. So I'm going to be in a world with two elites and a mass of an unorganized non-elite. The power of the two elites is going to depend on the asset they own. So these assets can be class specific. So it can be land, it can be capital, it can be human capital or trade networks, as in Ibn Khaldun. It can be access to social capital and social networks and networks of information, as in Manuel Castell's work on the network society in the early 21st century. But fundamentally, elites control different productive forces, if you wish. Um, and and this is the reason why they have power in a society. This is the reason why they sometimes a particular section of the elite is stronger than other sections of the elite. So it's the relative position or the power they get by owning these different factors of production is the reason why they can be powerful in different ways. So social interaction, economic interaction, generates a social surplus, economic surplus. And essentially, the stronger elite on their own, in any confrontation with the weaker elite, and certainly in confrontation with the unorganized non-elite, can generate a surplus, can appropriate this surplus, a fraction S of this surplus. So 1 minus S will go to the weaker elite. And I'm basically assuming here that the size of the surplus, that is surplus beyond necessities, the non-elite are in any bilateral confrontation with either of the two elites, they get nothing, they get zero. Okay. However, if the weaker elite is able to form a coalition with with an organized non-elite, then they can potentially grab a surplus Z, a shared Z, which is higher than what they would get if they were to bargain with the stronger elite on their own. So they'll get a share which is Z greater than 1 minus S. But of course, the share will have to be divided between the weaker elite and the now organized non-elite. So the non-elite is essentially unorganized. And that's where, can we go to the next slide? That's where we come to this idea of the non-elite dilemma, okay, or non-elite collective political activity. So collective political activity in the non-elite is organized by a political party that is able to reward its members selectively. So this is the important point that was made by Mankad Olson in 1965, who talked about that political parties emerge because there is a free-riding problem in collective political activity, and political parties are a solution to that free-riding problem. But it doesn't have to be a political party. It can be a union, anything, but I'm going to call this a political party for convenience. So each individual in the non-elite has a choice of becoming a party member, a union member. Joining the party or the union is costly. It becomes a dominant strategy for the individual if and only if the number of other individuals who have joined the party is greater than a critical threshold. So this will lead to, in a sense, two different types of self-fulfilling outcomes, equilibria. One in which no member joins the political party, no member of the non-elite joins the political party, and the non-elite as a whole remain disorganized, and one in which the non-elite every member joins the political party, and now the non-elite can act collectively. So the idea is very much that is driven to which of these two self-fulfilling situations will prevail will depend on which of these two situations are risk dominant from the perspective of the non-elite. In other words, in which of these two situations the non-elite, if other people, if they feel that they're going to lose out a lot, then by participating, even if a sufficient large number of non-elite have decided to participate, but I feel that if I participate, I will lose out a lot, then I will not choose to participate, and so on. So essentially, one of the reasons why this can happen is because by participating in such collective political activity, members of the non-elite can lose two types of rents or two types of payoff, of benefits. One is that they have to pay a cost for organizing collectively. That's the first thing. The second thing is, in many different parts of the world, stronger elites provide what I would call identity-based rents to the non-elite. So this is basically the idea that you are Hindu in contemporary India, if you are a Hindu person, non-elite person, the BJP, the current dispensation in India, is all about providing some rent if you are Hindu and nothing else. It doesn't matter whether you're elite or non-elite. You are Hindu, you get a rent. In the West, can we go to the next slide? In the West, it's mainly around citizenship. So if you are a citizen of the UK, UK has developed a welfare state with lots of welfare benefits. If you are a citizen of the UK, you get a rent, you get a payoff. Okay, so these can be identity based, or in today's world, they can be place based. But if you form a coalition with the weaker of the two elites, you can lose some of that rent, but you also have to pay a cost, the cost that you have of being a member of a union or a political party that opposes the stronger of the two elites. So that's, in a sense, the non-elite dilemma. So again, I apologize for this for this notation, but being a game theorist or a mathematical economist, I find it easy to understand and reason using some elementary mathematics. I promise you that this is the only slide with any kind of mathematical notation. I will explain the bulk of the reasoning with a diagram in the next slide, but I want to just set out the underlying formal framework. So I'm going to let F be the anticipated material payoff from successful coalition formation with the weaker elite that goes to the non-elite. I'm going to let B denote the identity or place-based rent that I have talked about. This should be interpreted as the extra rent, the extra identity and place-based rent that the stronger elite can offer to the non-elite relative to what the weaker elite can so offer. And finally, C, that's the cost of collective political activity. So if you are a payoff to a non-elite party member, so if you decide to join a party or a union as a non-elite member, so let pi denote the fraction of other non-elite members who are already in the party or the union. So then basically you get pi times F. So pi times F, you lose B because that's the extra identity or place-based rent that the stronger elite was offering. So in India's case, if you oppose the BJP as a Hindu, that's the rent that you lose if you join the Congress, because the Congress is not offering that rent, or the Communist Party of India is not offering that rent. Only the BJP is offering that rent. So you lose that B, and then you pay the extra cost of being a member of a union that you won't pay if you choose not to enter into a political formation that opposes the stronger of the two elites. If you choose not to join the party, well, then basically you will get not pi of F, which is what you would get if you were a party member and the political action was successful. You will get a fraction of that, which is epsilon pi of F. But now you will get the full rent that you, if you were part of the, if you didn't oppose the stronger elite. So you'd get B. And then basically you need some condition. You can write down the conditions under which it is it is rational, individually rational for you to join the political party that opposes the stronger elite and forms a coalition with the weaker elite. This leads to a game with two outcomes within the. In that game, which outcome will emerge is a complicated game theoretic question, but you can resolve it. And the condition that you get is the one that is written in the first line of the proposition, but I will explain that in more detail with respect to the diagram. So maybe we should just go directly to the diagram, if that's okay. On the next slide. Yes, sorry. Yes. So this is the diagram that I want to spend some time on because it summarizes all the relevant information. So on the x-axis of the diagram, we have the identity or place-based rent. On the y-axis, we have what the non-elite gets by entering into organized collective political activity and forming a coalition with the non-elite. D represents a region in the diagram where democracy emerges. O represents a part of the diagram where oligarchy emerges. And the important thing here is that what the non-elite can get by forming a political party that enables them to oppose the stronger elite in coalition with the weaker elite is bounded above by the minimum payoff that is acceptable to the weaker elite from forming such a coalition with the non-elite. So that is given by the horizontal line. And these are I don't worry about the notation. And then at the same time, it is also bounded below by this straight line, which is the minimum payoff that they need by forming a coalition with the weaker elite, given their cost, the cost of political activity, C, and the B being the rent that they're giving up by participating in this activity with the weaker elite. So essentially, democracy only emerges in that very small triangular region, which I've labeled as D, because it is bounded below by the cost of political activity and the rent the non-elite are given up, and it is bounded above by the payoff, the minimal payoff that's acceptable to the weaker elite for engaging in this activity with respect to the non-elite, in collaboration with the non-elite against the stronger of the two elites. And this is the central tension of democracy, and the reason why democracy is inherently unstable. The reason is basically very simple. The stronger elites can always increase B. So this is about basically saying immigrants are bad, focus on the citizens of a country. So this is the strategy of someone like Trump. This is the strategy of someone like Narendra Modi in India. This was the strategy of someone like Bolsonaro in Brazil. Fundamentally, you privilege one group over another, and you tell them these are the rents that you will get if you continue to support this oligarchy. If you don't support this oligarchy, if you oppose it, that's the rent you give up. The other important thing here is the cost that you pay. So in many different countries all over the world since the 1970s, you find that the cost of collective political activity has gone up. It has declined over many years before the 1970s, but since the 1970s, it has started going up. And this is reflected in the fact that it is more difficult to form a union. It is more difficult for a union to go on strike. In the West, in the UK, for instance, that's exactly what has happened since the 1980s after Margaret Thatcher. In many oligarchies, certain types of collective political activity is banned. So you cannot form a party, or the state can intervene and dissolve a party, an opposition party. The state can put people who support an opposition party under the name that they're unpatriotic. The state can simply jail them, as is the case in contemporary Russia. So these are all situations where C and B are high, which effectively means that this straight line that you find here, this angled straight line, that will shift to the left, and it will shrink the region in which democracy becomes viable, or democracy is viable. The other constraint here is inequality. So the less it is that the lower is the payoff that the non-elite are able to get by forming a coalition with the weaker elite, then essentially the less likely it is that the democracy will emerge. So if you look at the history of many different parts of the world, including the West, since the 1980s, you find that, broadly speaking, skilled labor, the share of GDP that goes to workers, that goes to labor, the functional distribution of income, that has become skewed in favor of the owners of capital, and within the portion of income that goes to labor, skilled labor is getting an ever larger share. Okay, so the fact that skilled labor is getting an ever larger share means that the F, which is, we can think of the non-elite as unskilled workers here, basically the F that the non-skilled work that the non-elite get, this is becoming lower. Okay, making democracy less likely. Okay, but at the same time, the share of income going to labor has itself fallen. So the S has gone up. The share of the owners of capital itself has gone up since the 1980s and has been going up since the 1980s in the West and in many other parts of the world, globally as well. So in all these different cases, S going up, and then basically the ability of countries to hold the owners of capital to account, that Z cannot be too high because capital is more mobile than labor in many different parts of the world. So because for all these reasons, this region where democracy emerges as a stable outcome, that region is getting smaller and smaller. And on the contrary, the regions where oligarchy prevails, that is becoming larger and larger. So I apologize for these two slightly technical slides.
Sayanta,
Yes.
Thank you. What is the difference between the other formulas about democracy? For example, we have the people know the Economist Democracy Index. In the Economist Democracy Index, the economists recognize four kinds the political regime, no? The autocracy, hybrids, imperfect, and the plain democracy. But in your formula, what kind the democracy system would can difference in your formula?
So the region that is D would correspond to the democratic framework that is a pure democracy, okay, full democracy. Okay, that's a place where you have where basically and then the oligarchy corresponds to the other three. So I'm not differentiating in this theory between the other three. We can differentiate, and in the paper that I'm writing, I will differentiate between them and the degrees of democracy, so to say. But for the purposes of this presentation, I am differentiating between democracy, which is pure democracy, and oligarchy, which also includes so-called anocracies, which are the kind of things that I think you are talking about in that fourfold distinction. Does that clarify matters, Hector?
Yes. Yes, we can continue, please.
Okay, can we go to the next slide? So I promise that's basically it, okay, as far as I'm concerned. So basically, in a democracy, that was in terms of the mathematics, that was the last slide. But fundamentally, the important thing here is that democracy and left-wing populism go hand in hand. So you have a balanced surplus allocation between the two elites. The two elites use democracy as a bargaining instrument to get to a more balanced surplus allocation between them than in an oligarchy. And the way that happens is that the non-organized elite, the non-elite organized to act collectively, the weaker elite forms a coalition with the organized non-elite, and then basically they ensure through that process that essentially you have a more surplus balance sharing allocation that is chosen by majority voting, and it cannot be overturned by the stronger elite. So that's fundamentally what I'm thinking about when I'm talking about democracy. So that's one thing. The opposite of this is oligarchy, which can be fascism or right-wing populism. And basically, this is a world in which the stronger elite splits the non-elite into two groups, essentially by offering one group these group-based or identity or place-based rents. They form a coalition with a favored subgroup, creating these populist rents, and then basically and they reduce the power of the weaker elite, and the non-elite don't collectively mobilize to against the stronger elite. So this is what I mean by fascism or right-wing populism. Okay, so we get to the next slide. So,
Professor,
so
sorry, I have a
yes,
question.
please.
In the other slide, you said, well, that the stronger elite can strategically increase the identity-based rents.
Yes,
And also the cost of collective actions has been rising since time ago.
yes,
So do you think we are structurally moving toward a persisting oligarchy equilibrium, or
yes,
that could be
yes.
reversed?
Well, I mean, anything can be reversed. Okay, uh, so yes, I think we should be very cautious, because I think that in the absence of conscious thinking, in the absence of collective mobilization, in the absence of acting collectively, I feel that we are gradually drifting towards an oligarchic equilibrium. Okay, and this is not a surprise. This is not a surprise because if you look at the wealth output ratios globally, okay, then certainly for Western countries like the UK, like France, like the US, these things are gradually going back to what they were in the 18th century. Okay, the composition of the wealth has changed, no doubt, but the owners of wealth is becoming more concentrated. The ownership of wealth is becoming more concentrated, and um, in a sense, the ability to appropriate current output is becoming has gone up for the owners of wealth. Okay, you see a decline in unions. You have seen a consistent decline in unions since the 1980s. And the thing is, it's not a surprise then that we see a corresponding rise of identity-based politics, of populism, of right-wing populism, of authoritarianism globally. Okay, because this is what happens in an unequal society. So paradoxically, the more unequal societies become, the more it is that we are likely to see right-wing populism and not left-wing politics, not left-wing mobilization. Okay, this is one of the paradoxes of human history. Okay, the so-called paradox of human history. And I think that the reason for it is this theory explains the reason for it. The reason for it is that the space that is there for collective mobilization, that diminishes. And unless the weaker elite are able to recognize that they have to give up a lot more in order to form a coalition with the non-elite, then that space goes smaller still. So what do I mean by that? In contemporary societies, the weaker elite are typically the skilled workers or the professional workers, things like that. Okay. Now, while we have seen the rise in inequality between owners of capital and workers, we have also seen a rise in inequality between skilled workers and unskilled workers. And one of the justifications of that, one of the ideological reflections of that, is the so-called ideology of meritocracy. Okay, so basically the idea that you become you are rich, your income is associated with the fact that you have more talent, innate talent, and whatever. Okay, so essentially, then we have this issue, but also at the same time, this rhetoric of the deserving and undeserving poor, deserving and undeserving members of the non-elite. So that's again creating a division in the non-elite. Okay, and so all these things have come together and have become increasingly more prominent in the 21st century, which to me suggests that unless we are able to reverse the course, and we can still reverse it through collective political activity, but unless we're able to reverse that course, then we are indeed drifting towards oligarchy.
Thank you very much, Professor.
I'm glad you asked that question. I think I'm going to skip this slide. Maybe we can go to some examples. Okay. So can you go to the next slide? So, an example in India where democracy faltered was in Indira Gandhi's attempt in the 1970s to mount a coup by imposing emergency. Okay. And the point was that it culminated in her losing the enormous popular support that she had enjoyed before that, because she had popularized the slogan of Garibi Hatao, remove poverty, and so on. And even though she promised more redistribution to the non-elite, it was not credible. Okay, it was not credible because she was not willing to give up the increased share that the portion of the elite, the urban middle class or the urban bourgeoisie she represented, the portion of the surplus that they were able to appropriate from the landed upper classes in emergency, they were not willing to give up a lot of that to the people to the non-elite, broadly speaking, in India. And so basically, you had the non-elite broadly aligning with anti-Congress parties, and they fiercely opposed her by organizing a mass mobilization. And then she lost the next elections heavily in 1977 to an entirely new party, which fundamentally represented the interests of the landed gentry, the rural landowners, small and large, throughout India. Can we go to the next slide? So I'm going to give you an example from history now. So if you look at France, after the 1848 revolution in France, remember 1848 is the year that Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto. So basically, as a product of that, France introduced universal male suffrage in 1848. A huge social reform agenda was passed thanks to the alliance between the working class and the Republicans. And then basically a conservative government disenfranchised 2.8 million men in 1850 to reverse those social reforms. However, in 1851, the Republicans and the working class supported a coup led by Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, who was a nephew or a grandnephew of the famous Napoleon. And he restored universal suffrage, initially formally, but from 1868, more substantially. And basically, they enabled this idea of having organized collective political activity. Okay. Can we go to the next slide, please? Another example of a post-colonial society where democracy still is by some measures very unstable. So Nigeria, essentially, at the time of independence, there were three ethnic organizations with three corresponding political parties. The Northern People's Congress, which drew its support from the Hausa and the Fulani tribes, the Action Group, which drew its support from the Yoruba tribes, and the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons, relying on the support of the Igbo in eastern Nigeria. And then this clear regional divide was inherited from the British colonial period. These different areas where each of these tribes were dominant were administered as independent units. And community identities were very strong in shaping economic participation and differentiation and social differentiation. And there was a clear divide between these groups. And so basically, organization was along ethnic lines where you didn't have much interaction across ethnic lines, along the lines of the emergence of a social class. Okay. And so what you find is that post-independence, the political history of Nigeria was a series of unstable democratic regimes, okay, where different sections of the non-elite, essentially different sections of the elite, were able to mobilize non-elites split along ethnic and geographic lines. Okay, and this resulted in the instability of the democracy in Nigeria. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this leads, in a sense, to the contemporary dilemmas the contemporary issues around democracy and whether democracy is going to be stable. So basically, the atomized working classes in high-income countries today don't have the ability to mobilize in any significant political organization or party. Okay, so most union membership has fallen. Unions don't really work with workers in the unorganized sector effectively or in a large way. It's mainly in the state sector. Okay, which is mainly, so unions work mainly for essentially professional classes and skilled workers, not for unskilled workers. Okay, and essentially what you find is that social democratic and labor parties have become parties of the educated, mainly public sector, white collar middle classes, and have given up ideas on universal social progress through collective political activity. Okay, so this is the idea of new labor. This is the idea of centrist parties like Macron in France. This is the idea of how social democratic parties across Western Europe, but also how the Democrats in the US have evolved in their practice. Okay, and so essentially you have this non-elite who are quoted by the populist radical right, and this essentially they do this by offering identity and place-based rent. So identity rent through cultural conservatism, while delegitimizing any political coalition with the democratic parties and other workers, okay, via collective political activity. Okay, so you increase the rents, you increase the cost of mobilizing with other non-elite. Okay, and there are similar issues in Brazil and India. In Brazil under Bolsonaro, and India under the BJP. So this is a kind of a global phenomena, and I think going forward, the prospects of oligarchy emerging have only become stronger. Especially if you see the re-election of Trump after Biden's election. So these are things that become, and the rise of the radical right in Western Europe, the dominance of parties like the BJP in India, and I believe the resurgence of Bolsonaro's party in Brazil under the current administration. These are all bad signs. These are signs that oligarchy is likely to emerge again in different parts of the world. So can we get to the next slide? So what are the lessons? What are the key insights that you can get from this discussion, from this theory? The key thing is that, firstly, in a democracy, the reality of non-elite collective activity is fundamental, and not just in terms of joining political parties, but also in terms of organizing in terms of unions, and it is as essential as the right to vote. Okay, and by that, by non-elite collective political activity, I don't mean collective political activity with non-elite along ethnic lines or along lines of some fixed identity, but across such boundaries. It's fundamental. Okay, and so you can have elections, but you may not have a democracy because you don't have this freedom of association. Okay, inequality plays a huge role. Okay, in the stability of democracies. Right? In fact, it is. You could say that it is democracies only thrive when inequality is moderated, and in a sense, inequalities get moderated when democracies thrive. So there's a kind of two-way feedback between the two. And in a world where you have rising inequality, where you have more concentration of ownership of capital, where the share of capital globally, the share of global output that goes to capital has been going up, and within countries have been going up, then basically, so there is a more limited ability to redistribute within national boundaries, then stable democracies is not a given. Okay, in fact, you can have instability, you can have political disintegration, you can have cycles, and the rise of oligarchy is indeed possible. Okay, and so I think I'm going to stop. I think there's one more slide, and then I'll stop and welcome any questions that you may have. So can we go to the next slide? Yeah, so basically the conclusion is a repetition of what I've said. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but fundamentally, the prognosis is not an optimistic one. but it is not a pessimistic one either, because a lot depends on what can or cannot, what is done or isn't done today by people who have a stake in the continuance and perpetuation of democracy. So I'm going to stop here and invite any questions that people may have.
Well, thank you, Sayantan. Sayantan, in the past, the people, a question, no, in the classical history, what transition the Roman republicanism? Because before the Punic Wars, the Republican Roman Republic very democracy experience. Before Punic War, after Punic War, Rome has many slaves, no?
Mhm.
So Rome changed to a oligarchy experience. Finally, empire, Roman Empire. So it's very important the access to labor, to slaves for the political Roman political system. In this moment, the news we can read director the NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, no, declaring, no, that artificial general intelligence has essentially been achieved. So we can see more powerful intelligent artificial in this moment, artificial intelligence in the next years. So in your experience, could be the connection between the democracy, artificial intelligence?
Okay. Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. Very good question. So, yes, of course, there is a connection, okay, because any technological change, any major technological change can work in two ways, okay. One is it can de-skill workers. So skilled workers can become de-skilled. And once workers become de-skilled, then they're replaced by machines. Okay. The other is that the technology is used in such a way that it empowers workers. Okay. Now, the first option is always the option that is chosen by the owners of capital, because in this way, you're able to reduce wages. In this way, you're able to control what workers do. In this way, the group of workers become atomized. They consider themselves as individuals. They don't see the futility of collective political activity as a mode of resistance to the owners of capital. So that becomes very, very important for them. So, we could be moving in that direction, and it's not a surprise that the people who make these statements are all either chief executives or shareholders of big corporations that are trying to essentially market artificial intelligence as a way of routinizing work and replacing workers and replacing and de-skilling workers and replacing workers with machines. But at the same time, that's not fate. I mean, that's not a given. It is at the same time within our control to try and resist this, to try and change how this technology can be used, but as a way of skilling up workers, as a way of extending the scope of what a worker can do. Okay, so that is another option, and either of these two options is not a inevitable consequence of the technology itself. It is a consequence of how we, as a society, as an economy, we adopt the technology, who controls the adoption of technology, and therefore who controls the direction in which this technology continues to evolve, who controls the benefits of using this technology, and what are the sources of resistance to that. So none of either option is not inevitable, either option is not fate. A lot depends on how we respond to um, to um, to to this technology. And I agree with you that if we go down the route that is being suggested by this fait accompli almost that is being suggested by the chief executives and owners of these powerful corporations that are developing AI, well, yes. So I hope, Jose, as you transcribe it, using your AI companion, you you are able to use it in a way that resists the the further development of AI along lines that deskills workers, that routinizes work, that replaces workers by machines, by this AI, as against a way of empowering workers who are able to use this in a more effective way, not only for themselves but collectively as a group, as a class, to promote and to resist, the owners of capital, because I think that's a fundamental conflict. And if you don't do that, then I think we'll be in trouble. So so these are the kind of factors to bear in mind. I don't think this is inevitable. I think it is very much down to us living today to take this on, and to resist it in the way that we can, each of us,
Sayantan,
individually, but most importantly, collectively. Yes, please, Hector.
some friend from the global north, America, share in his experience, global history, global study is that. But at the same time, some friends, some colleagues from global south start to interest in global study, in global history, and they believe this is the beginning, the global study. The globalization, could be a Western experience, United Kingdom and North America experience. When we change, we leave this situation. Some people believe this is the end of globalization, but at the same time, in the North, in the South, in the global South, the countries, the people, the institution, more change, more contact, and they experience, no, they start, no, we live globalization, not the old globalization, but a new globalization. You have experience in Europe, you have experience in United Kingdom, in different universities, United Kingdom. What is your experience in this connection between globalization and democracy? Democracy and globalization, migration and democracy.
Right. So again, that's a very interesting and difficult question, to be honest with you. So so if you look at, so let me focus on the post Second World War period, because the previous period, globalization has many dimensions. It's a complicated problem, really, because you have to look at colonization, but you also have to look at the flows of indentured labor in the British Empire. You mentioned South Africa, Indians in South Africa, and I'm married to a South African of Indian origin, because her family were taken to South Africa as indentured labor in the 19th century. So it's true that, but let me just focus a little bit on the issue of what is happening after the the Second World War. I think fundamentally the issue has to do with the mobility of capital. Okay, so John Maynard Keynes was a huge proponent of capital controls. Okay. He believed in free trade, which I think is also very, very important. But he also believed that you should have capital controls, because that gives much more freedom to a country to enact its own laws, to enact its own taxes in a way that it otherwise would not have, and it leads to a more stable global economic system. So my take on this is that this was a vision that was not adopted by the Bretton Woods institutions as they were designed in the second after the Second World War. On the contrary, it was a world of relatively free capital flows, but labor is less mobile than capital. And what little mobility of workers that we see globally is very minusculely small, really, relative to the mobility of capital across national boundaries. And I think this has had a consequence. This has had many, many different types of consequences. And this has led to the experience of globalization, which has been quite a mixed bag for the majority of people across the globe. Okay, we all know what happened in the 1980s in Southern America. We know the repeated debt crises. We all know that history. We know the imposition of the IMF programs, austerity programs, the destruction of the social fabric of many different societies. And this was in part because, in some sense, you had premature capital account liberalization. So I don't know how many of you know, but the 2001 Argentinian debt crisis, the private savings of Argentinians outside the country was higher in dollar terms, was higher than the total debt that was owed by Argentina, and Argentina went into a debt default from which it has never really come out. Okay, repeated cycles of default, of debt restructuring, of political change, of political instability. You look at countries, and in contrast, many Asian countries actually have had capital controls as part of their economic policy mix, on a very routine basis. So Malaysia has had that, India has had that, China has had that. They still have it today. And if you look at the political, say the late 1990s, you had an Asian financial crisis. And in this Asian financial crisis, a lot of countries like Thailand and Indonesia suffered a great deal. Taiwan, South Korea suffered a great deal. But Malaysia did not. India did not. China did not. And again, that had to do with the fact that you had strong capital controls. So I suspect that to a very large extent, we are experiencing a globalization that is driven by the imperatives of the owners of capital globally, in different parts of the world. But I think a different type of globalization would be one in which you have non-elites in different parts of the world trying to experience each other's lives, trying to meet each other, trying to learn from each other, trying to collectively organize. I think that would be a different type of globalization, but one that perhaps is more linked and is more beneficial to the majority of people in the world than the one that we have experienced so far. And one that is more conducive to democracy.
United Kingdom has a monarch, yes, but at the same time has a long democracy experience. It's a society, very modern society in migration experience, no? Because we can read the shares, the Adam Smith, the political economy. In the past, the Scottish professor now is a University of Glasgow is an open university. It's a special moment in this year for the chair, no? The Adam Smith political economy. You have a global experience. We have friends in the Aligarh Muslim University. It's the 19th century Indian university. Is the biggest library beautiful library with medieval manuscripts. Gadamada in Indonesia. I would like to share. Indonesia is a big country, but new in the big economies, developed free program for Bahasa Indonesia in South America. Indonesia, I project in some year will be very important in higher education. This is a Muslim country, but at the same time, he's a political philosophy Republican. Yes, has a autocracy experience, yes, but it's a different experience. Is your comparison with other Muslim countries, for example, Pakistan and Indonesia. There are republics that are Muslim, but it's very different, the political projection. So, in your research about the democracy, we can find in United Kingdom the Brexit, the Brexit in 21st century. So we can project more local or continental experience. So the continental Europe and the local United Kingdom, In this projection, we can find more important the local experience in democracy than national or regional experience. What is your idea about the local and the national in democracy experience?
Right. So it's again a very difficult question and a very good question, actually. So let me try and answer it as best as I can. So clearly, the UK. So I would say that there was the UK before the financial crisis of 2008 was very different from the UK that I live in now. And I've been in the UK since the late 1990s, when I came here to teach at the University of Warwick initially, and then I was a professor there before I moved to Glasgow. So the UK pre-2000, the pre-financial crisis was a very different beast and a very different country from the country that it is now. And the reason for it, in my view, is because once the 2008 financial crisis hit, before the 2008 financial crisis, there was a kind of, if you wish, a Faustian bargain between New Labour and the financial capital, or the owners of financial capital, which was that we will not regulate financial capital, we will let financial capital be free, but we will use the tax revenue that is generated by financial capital located in the City of London and so on to fund their organizations such as the NHS, which is a truly free national health service, universities, and so on. Of course, after the 2008 financial crisis, that kind of pact, in a sense, was exposed. Its weaknesses were exposed because essentially the country as a whole had to bail out major banks while imposing austerity on ordinary people. And the impact of that austerity, and then the consequence of that was that in bailing out the banks, both in terms of an actual bailout, but also through so-called unconventional monetary policy to prop up asset prices after the 2008 financial crisis to prevent the country going into a deflationary spiral. The consequence of that was that it actually increased wealth inequality. At a time when the state was imposing austerity on the rest of the world, on the rest of the population in the UK. Now, the form of redistribution that has been politically acceptable in the UK is that the state provides very high quality public services, whether it is through the NHS in health, whether it is through free education in schools, whether it is through the provision of high quality infrastructure on a day-to-day basis that most people can enjoy, that public transport and so on. Now, this austerity has very badly impacted on the ability of the state to provide these basic public services at a time when inequality has been going up. So Brexit was a protest vote against this rising inequality and austerity, which was effectively used as a device by people who wanted the UK to leave the European Union, because this would weaken the European Union as a political bloc with respect to the US. So it was driven mainly by people from the US, from Republicans in the US and their sympathizers in the UK. They mobilized the working class, the white working class, mainly on these grounds, that basically immigration was a bad thing, because it was driving down those rents, the rents that I talked about, the B that I was talking about. It was driving down those rents, and allying with labor and so on was actually diminishing those rents. Allying with people who were parties that were pro-European was diminishing those rents. But what it was, and they did it successfully, but what it was again the idea that you wanted less regulation, because the European Union within the single market has huge regulations about what firms can or cannot do. There are a lot of protection for workers. It was really a way of reducing those protections of regulation, which should benefit effectively the owners of capital. So, but they were successful because their argument was that you were reducing rents, and under New Labour, inequality also went up, but they thought that people wouldn't mind the rising inequality if the quality of public services provided was still going to be very high. What happened under austerity was the quality of public services went down, but inequality continued to rise. So effectively, it was the worst of possible worlds. Then you had COVID. Then you had, which was again a huge role for the state, but essentially in a world where you have capital being mobile across different national boundaries, the ability of the state to found its activities by an appropriate tax system gets ever more limited. So you get into deficit financing, which then in turn limits the ability of the state to do things that it ought to be doing if it is going to benefit ordinary people on a day-to-day basis. That shrank even more. And so we are now, in this world where, from the point of view of ordinary people, they see inequality going up. They see the state not being able to provide public services in the way that it could. They blame this on immigration, on mass immigration. They're encouraged to do so. And within the political establishment of the UK, there is this big rhetoric around good and bad immigrants. And I fall into the category of the good immigrant. But there are many other people who, are no less deserving than me, who fall under the category of bad immigrants. And there is this type of rhetoric that goes with it, and political mobilization that goes with it. And I'm afraid that the combination of these different forces has been to fray the social and public and political fabric of the UK very badly. Current governments and the current Labour administration that is run by the Labour Party has at best partial answers to these things. It needs, no country on their own can do it. Really, it needs countries, it needs social democracy, it needs people who have a stake in social democracy globally to come together to try and address this. I'm not advocating a journey back to socialism, because that's an experiment that has failed. But a social democracy certainly can be tried, and we need people who are social democrats, who understand that markets have great virtues in terms of generating wealth, in terms of innovation, in terms of many other things, but who also understand the limits of markets, in particular, the tendency of markets to increase inequality, and then as a consequence, increase concentration of wealth and power, which in turn undermines the functioning of markets in some sense, because markets become more monopolistic. I think people who are social democrats, who understand both the reasons for celebrating markets, but also their limitations, should be very seriously concerned about the trend towards autocracy and oligarchy, and need to come together locally, regionally, nationally, globally, to resist this turn. That's my view, for whatever it's worth.
Yes, it's a local fight,
Yes.
global and local fight. Amigos, amigas, ¿tienen alguna pregunta, algún comentario? Luisa, Ilen, Ámbar. Sí, por favor, Inga.
Yes.
Sí,
Professor, I have a question. Do you think that AI could impact democracy as more personal data is collected by their system, considering that this data can be used to influence people's decision through, for example, targeted ads and recommended videos on social media? So could this potentially be seen as a form of manipulation?
It could, and it is. I think if you look at the history of technological change, very often they have essentially privatized the commons of some description. Okay, and the commons in this case is the data that we generate through our own social interaction, etc. And they're privatizing it, and they're using it to create commodities that they can sell back to us, our own data in some sense, the products of that data. So yes, but I think the really worrying thing is that from the point of view of what I've been talking about here, is not only the political manipulation, but also the economics of the contemporary period, which is that I'm really worried that we'll see more and more routinization of work. We'll see more and more de-skilling of workers. We'll see more and more atomization of workers. And we'll see more and more the rise of this identity and authoritarian politics, which is where the manipulation comes in, and the rise of oligarchy. So I think these things are all connected, but this is not inevitable. There is another way. But for that, we have to mobilize now, today, and try and see if we can do something different. Because the technology can be very, very good too. It can actually be a way of expanding our potentials as human beings. If you read Marx in the Critique of the Gotha Program in the 19th century, he writes about a situation where people can be thinkers in the morning, can go and fish in the afternoon. And that's a world where basically labor is not needed for the production of goods and services, the bulk of production of goods and services. So that's a world in which machines or capital does that. You don't have scarcity anymore. So in principle, this could be, under the right conditions, that can be used as a way of removing this constraint of scarcity, and therefore empowering people to live the lives that they always wanted to live in the ways that they want to live. But for that to happen, a totally different type of political, economic, and social mobilization is required.
Thank you, Professor, for the answer.
Luisa.
Hi, I would like to know, in your opinion, what are the institutional pathways to the social democracies can unite their power. So they form an alliance to help the social democracies, because nowadays we cannot trust in institutions like ONU, and because I think they are weak against dictations. So I think with I don't see like an answer to the problem, to the what we're living right now.
Yes. So you see, part of the concern I have is precisely the point that you have raised, which is that people start to think that this is an inevitable thing that's going to happen and they cannot change it. So they may as well as accept it and adapt to it in some way as individuals, not collectively, because collectively, any collective source of resistance is ruled out. So the best that you can do is to adapt to it individually. Okay. But that's not inevitable, and that's not a necessary consequence of what I've said. Okay. If you think about it, social democracies can come together. You can have a world in which there is no reason why the Social Democrats in Denmark or the Social Democrats in the UK, Labour Party, the Green Party, why they can't talk to Social Democrats in Latin America directly, why they can't raise their concerns and see where they can come together to address common concerns, why they can't do that. I mean, there's nothing that prevents us from doing it. On the contrary, we live in a world where communication, the cost of communicating across large distances, this is an example. This particular talk is an example of that. I'm here in Glasgow, in the north, same degree of latitude as Vladivostok, and I'm talking to you. Okay, you are in Peru at the moment, in Lima. Okay, I'm not there in the same room as you, but we can talk and we can discuss and we can find out what our common concerns are. We can even mobilize on those to address those common concerns. So it's very interesting because so we have the opportunity to use precisely this technology in a different way, in a way that benefits common people, in many ways that benefits ordinary people all over the world together. But it needs conscious effort. It needs us to go beyond the normal way of thinking and looking at things.
Okay,
Nothing
thank
prevents
you.
Louisa, nothing prevents you from talking to somebody, a member of a student union in the University of Glasgow, with your concerns and coming up with a common view of the world.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Right? Because you have the technology. We are talking, so you can talk to other people as well.
Yeah,
But
of course.
don't give in. Don't accept this change or the direction of travel as inevitable. Because if we do, then we give up on this idea of collective action and we
Yeah,
adapt to this as individuals.
yeah. I'm not giving up.
That's more that.
Thank you.
Sí, Amber.
Okay, and can you hear me, Professor?
Yeah, I can hear you, yes.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for all the answers that you have given, and also thank you for the question. And well, I have a question about the answers that you have said before. And since I understand, it seems that the globalization increased capital mobility, right? And the political organization remains mostly national. And also at the same time, identity-based narratives fragment the non-elite. So, do you think this mismatch between global economic forces and local political structures is the fundamental reason behind democratic instability today?
I mean, so the fact that political organizations have remained local is not an accident. It is itself endogenous. Okay, so this is the thing to remember. The fact that only certain types of global activity can take place is itself endogenous. It's not an accident. Okay, so you can have Davos, you can have United Nations, you can have free trade agreements, but you can't have unions which are global in nature. Okay, so this is by design. This is not an accident. Okay, there was a period when you could have and you had cases of unions of workers in Glasgow going on strike because of Pinochet, what Pinochet was doing in Chile. Okay, that was legal once upon a time in the UK. It's illegal now. Okay, so these are things that are. So if you take the current structure as given, then certain things will seem almost inevitable. Okay, and we are powerless to resist it. We are powerless to think of a different type of world. Okay, so what we have to do is to free our minds to ask the question: is the current structure inevitable? But no, because it is itself the product of human activity, human interaction. So we are human beings. We can change it. We can resist. We can try to change it. We can try to think of an alternative. We can try to see the world in a different way. We can try to mobilize in a different way. We can try to interact with each other in a different way. None of that is inevitable. Okay, so one of the things is, but you must understand, in order to do that, you need to understand that these things are not. Many of the things that we see in the world are, I'm not saying conscious design or some conspiracy, but the design is not accidental. Okay, it is complementary to many other things, and we have to understand those underlying issues and factors in order to resist them, in order to do things in a different way, in order to think of different alternatives, in order to organize and mobilize ourselves in different ways. I hope I'm not sure I answered your question very well, but I hope I.
No, yeah, thank you. You give me another perspective of the question that I have. So thank you.
Okay.
Well, Sayantan, it's an opportunity for our university to continue academic activities, virtual, then physical. Why not Glasgow? Why not Lima? For a student,
of course,
or professor, we had time.
Yes.
We had time. United Kingdom, especially Scotland, has a long American experience, 18th century until now. This will increase in 21st century. Glasgow, Lima is a global cities. We have, in this moment, Peru, China, increased connection, increased contact. China, Peru, and Brazil is a continuous activity in economic aspect. Glasgow has ASEAN experience. Scotland has ASEAN experience, Indian experience, Pakistani, Bangladesh experience. So we can project the shared experience, share this global experience for our students, for our community, for our professor. We have time to project, why not? You can visit Lima in the future. In 9 years, my city will celebrate 500 years old, the Spanish foundation, in 9 years. But Lima has a long indigenous history. Our first building, first temple, is the second millennium before Christ. So it's an indigenous Europe history at the same time, very, very similar to Scotland, before the Roman, before the Anglo-Saxon, no? This is indigenous, yes? So
No, I agree with you.
we can share experience, but at the same time, this is activity with the many universities in the south, no? Gadamada, Malaya, Stellenbosch, Cape Town. For example, the last node, we had activity with the Dakar in Senegal, Dakar University, and the other university in Africa we have with Ibadan and Nsukka. Nsukka, University of Nigeria in Nsukka. With India, yes, Aligarh and the other university. I host some Congress, the Indian study in Lima, the 20, some more before the pandemic. Well, the idea is seeing how to help the student. No? This is the next leader, the 21st century, this transnational, transatlantic experience. Well, thank you very much, Sayantan. I hope that we can meet in Lima in the future or meet in Glasgow in the future. Well,
you're very welcome to Glasgow. You and your students and colleagues are welcome to Glasgow, and we should definitely pursue the opportunity to collaborate. And if you get in touch with me with a concrete email or a proposal, I will put you in touch with people in the university who will be happy to discuss that further with you and with your colleagues in terms of taking that forward.
Yes, the democracy in this moment is very key issue for all the people. Amigos, amigas, estamos pues con la Universidad de Glasgow, con el profesor Sayantan Gozal. Por favor, ¿podrían prender sus cámaras para tomar una captura de la sesión? ¿Pueden prender sus cámaras, por favor, para tomar una captura de la sesión? Un momento. A ver, un momento. Please.
Yes.
It's for a picture, Sayantan. Wait a moment.
Okay.
Yes. Ámbar, tú nos indicas cuándo puedes hacer la captura, please. Yes. ¿Nos indicas?
Ok, un ratito.
Sí. Pueden vender sus cámaras para tomar una captura de la sesión. Muchas gracias.
Ya voy a tomar. A ver, una más, un ratito. Un ratito. Una más. Ya.
Bueno, muchas gracias a todos, todas. Sayantan, I hope that visit Sudamérica. No? Could be Brazil, could be Peru.
I have been to Mexico, of course the US a few times, but also I've been to Mexico. I would love the opportunity to be there in Lima in person with all of you. I would love that if that's possible, and let's try and work towards that going forward. But thank you again for this opportunity to give this talk. It was a great experience. Thank you for all the questions. I think it was tremendous. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sayantan. Amigos, amigas, estamos con el seminario. Este mes de abril tenemos actividades con la Universidad de Sao Paulo en el área de geografía. Estamos atentos a su asistencia. Muchas gracias por su participación y estamos en una próxima actividad.
Thank you.
Gracias, doctor. Ha sido un gusto. Un abrazo a todos.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you,
Gracias.
Professor Sayanta. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Pregunto por la asistencia. No se escucha bien.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for the questions.
En el chat, la asistencia.
¿Cuál es la asistencia? ¿No basta con escribir en el chat?
Gracias por todo. La asistencia está en el chat.
Gracias.
Pero si se escribe en el chat, ¿ya es suficiente o no?
Hay un link
En el
de
chat pueden
asistencia.
ver la asistencia, por favor. En el chat
Pero ahí
pueden
no
ver.
aparece.
Tienen que ingresar al link del chat. Está en el chat. Gracias a todos. Gracias, Sayantan.
Gracias. Muchas gracias por todos.
Gracias, Professor Sayanta. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure for me too. Bye.